I think it's time to get started. Thank you all for joining us for our latest in the series of Accelerating Excellence conversations. Here we're talking election security navigators. I'm Noah Prates, former director of elections from Cook County, Illinois, where I worked beginning in 2000. I left in 2019 to consult with federal, state, and local election officials, mostly on election security. In 2020, I partnered up with Jennifer Morale to create the elections group in hopes that we could build a team of former election officials to support the work of current election officials like the folks you'll hear from today. With me are three amazing leaders at the state level who implemented two pretty awesome, innovative shared services programs. Judd, Amy, Rich, can you each introduce yourselves? We'll start let's start with you, Amy.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Kelly, and as Noah said, I'm with the Illinois State Board of Elections. I have been with the board for 13 years. I've worked in various divisions within the state, and prior to that, I was in an election office in a small county in central Illinois. So I have local experience and now state experience, and I'm really looking forward to discussing the excellence in Illinois and Colorado surrounding our cyber navigator programs and then their cyber program. So thank you for having me, and I'll turn it over to the folks in Colorado.
All right, Jay, thanks, Amy. Judd, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. So I'm Judd Choate. I'm the state election director for Colorado. I've been in this position for 14 years. Part of what we're going to talk about today is the creation of what we call the rescue team, which is sort of our in-house version of the Cyber Navigator program. And we actually went a pretty significantly different direction with the way that ours was formulated and ended up doing a lot of its work. So kind of excited to talk to you about the direction we went in our version of the Cyber Navigator. And Rich?
That's great. Rich
Schliep, Chief Technology Officer. I've been with the Secretary of State's office for about 22 years. I served 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats in that time. And I was the Chief Information Security Officer for about 10 years. And I've been the CTO for about 2 to 3 years now. So glad to have this opportunity to talk today.
Hey, thanks, y'all. So look, I'm going to take a little personal privilege here, spend a few minutes sort of refreshing our recollection. The sands have shifted a lot over the last 7 years, and I want to sort of talk about my experience, the way I see the world before I turn it over to you guys to really share your expertise. In 2016, Illinois' online voter system had data stolen from it, ultimately attributed to Russia. Shortly thereafter, on its way out the door, then Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson named elections critical infrastructure. That was a signal to the world that elections were important to the American way of life and were to be messed with. It was also a signal to election officials, nearly 9,000 people who run state, city, county governments around the country, that they'd have access to expertise necessary to help meet this challenge. Those early days were interesting. The feds didn't know who to call in any of the states about elections. DHS needed to build its understanding of elections, of the infrastructure, of the risks, and of the people running them. Judd, I remember you and I running around as these council formed, back and forth between sort of Albany and DC, popping into DEF CON in Las Vegas. You know, the folks inside the last administration were great. Chris and Matt, Bob Kolaski, they did a great job learning and supporting the community. Now the folks in this administration have continued that commitment to supporting election officials. Other agencies too, right? The EAC, the FBI, Secret Service to a lesser degree, the National Guard is a big partner in a lot of places. But fundamentally, election security is a state and local problem. Okay, between the scarcity of federal investments, traditional skepticism of federal involvement in anything, a closely guarded sort of parochial and federalist tendencies in state, counties, and cities, it leaves election security as a local problem to be solved locally with feds and others in financial or subject matter support. A little home state license here. Illinois really took the lead, given where they started, providing what I think is the only scalable solution set there is to supporting local administrators. They did this by building their so-called Cyber Navigator program, and we're going to hear a lot about that today. That was 2016, though, and a lot has changed. There are constants. Elections have always been super complex, very difficult to run. Lots of people, technologies, policies, rules, and laws intertwining. But through time, there's been a constant. Election officials want to run the best election possible, doing all that they can with the little they have. No ballot printing errors, right? Great testing of equipment, great service to voters, great training of poll workers, trying to make this process accessible and observable, transparent to observers, parties, candidates, always working towards perfection. But since 2016, we've just inundated them with another challenge set. First, the operating rules are constantly shifting under their feet. State legislatures working on real or perceived ballot access or voter integrity issues. Election officials pivot to meet those changes. They were dramatic in 20, but while trying to run perfect elections, they're now like staving off foreign nation states in the cyberspace or information operations. They're trying to secure facilities, staff, and their voters in a really complex domestic environment. We're asking them to show their math. Election officials have always gotten the right answer, put out the correct results. Now, though, there's an effort to show more math about why these results can be relied upon, an increasing commitment to audits, not just of election results, but of compliance with operating procedures, with chain of custody practices, building a body of evidence, even though the evidence alone doesn't mean if people don't see it or understand it, that they'll grasp it. So election officials are trying to communicate to a skeptical public or a set of voters, why what they do is trustworthy. Each of the states take a different approach to helping their locals, along with Illinois and their largely cyber-focused efforts. We're going to hear about how Colorado pivoted and used their Navigator-like shared services program called Rescue to help their locals manage some of the fallout from a confused, frustrated electorate. This electorate's getting information from a variety of sources. It is very tough on voters right now. Of course, they're getting the government line, trustworthy election officials, information from election officials. This is a big growth area for election officials, recognizing over the last few years they can't just administer the election. They got to tell their story about why the elections they run are trustworthy. But the government tag raises more doubts in some quarters. Nevertheless, they're not remaining silent. They're putting their information into the world to be part of the public conversation. Some sources of the information are trying to provide good information, but it's wrong. And this is misinformation, something that's always been there. On the other hand, some sources of election information are actively trying to destabilize democracy. These are the foreign influence operations we're also worried about. Them getting inside our heads, driving Americans apart. Think about Iran sending pre-election emails purporting to be from a domestic radical group in hopes of confusing, angering, frustrating Americans. This is an influence operation and part of our information sphere. Sometimes information is just provided out of context or proportion. This information can spread organically, but it can also be used maliciously to thread together misleading or destructive narratives. Elections are complex, mistakes happen. They're correctable. They're always been corrected. But now mistakes or unmet expectations are used maliciously or they're misinterpreted innocently, and the trust is undermined in elections. And so it's tough, but election officials don't get to solve the source of that problem. They can only work on consequences, mitigating the effects by ensuring they provide consumable evidence-based information. Those are two of the big problem sets we'll hear about today. That's not all they're dealing with. Some are facing threats to their safety, safety of observers, voters. When they aren't addressing those concerns or answering FOIAs, they're struggling to just execute great elections. I've never in my career witnessed a more challenging ecosystem for election administrators. So today you're going to hear about shared services programs, election security navigator programs. They stem from sort of two basic premises. One, it is impossible to staff every office, nearly 9,000 around the country, with the needed expertise across cyber, physical, operational, communications, personal safety domains. It can't be done. Even if government had the money to pay for it, there isn't the workforce with the available expertise to put in every one of those 9,000 offices. But second, this is the good news. It doesn't have to be provided to each office. Shared services programs can drastically support under-resourced local election offices. Amy, we'll turn to you in a second. I mean, I remember looking back in 2016. I mean, we were all doing elections then, though it feels like a lifetime ago. I got a couple emails that popped up in that summer from my staff saying statewide systems down. A month later, it was back up. Illinois said, yep, we'd been breached by hackers, later attributed to the Internet Research Agency. At the time, we didn't know we were a witness to history, but that was a real inflection point in the field of election admin. The consequences are with us today. Through the following years, 17, we all ran around the country, around the state, getting briefings, doing exercises. We learned what our adversaries were capable of. I mean, nation state adversaries could steal plans from Lockheed Martin or 22 million records from personnel management with all of our secure information. They could take down Sony because they're mad about a film, or take down the electrical grid in a foreign country. It was clear to us that we're paying attention, that cities and counties were in way over their heads with the capabilities and intent of these adversaries. Luckily, DHS got involved, CIS got involved, created an ISAC, but we all knew that wasn't enough, okay? In Illinois, we learned this early on. We had a heck of a debate about who would fill what role, who should do what. So, Amy, in early 2018, I remember sitting in a restaurant off Bourbon Street with a lot of other staff level Illinoisans, where we all said, hey, shared services, Cyber Navigator, let's get behind it. That month, the EAC passed out $13 million from Congress. Illinois created a Navigators program. So, Amy, let's start with you. What do you remember about those crazy days of 16, 17, 18, when Illinois was the center of the election universe?
So in 2016, I was actually the Deputy Director for Operations Division within the State Board of Elections. So when, looking back when our 2016 breach occurred, there was just a lot of uncertainty, I think, amongst us at the state. We knew that we had to get assistance when, this was discovered. We had IT department that, once it was discovered, we reported it accordingly. We knew we had to notify, anybody whose information could possibly have been breached. So, we did what we knew we had to do, but I think going through a learning curve of it, we'd never been through anything like that before. We obviously at the time wanted to make sure that we got our system back up, that we could provide the support that we needed. So I think those, looking back just from what I know, because again, I wasn't involved in integral parts of that incident when it happened. For me, having worked in the operations side of things and just hearing kind of like what you said, Noah, we knew the statewide system was down. We didn't know specifically why. And then making sure that we reached out and reported to the correct entities, who do you call to report such a thing at the FBI, or even, our General Assembly members, and then the public, how do we, reach that topic with the public, all while making sure that we preserve any evidence that needed to preserve at the time for the feds, and then also making sure messaging wise that, we were putting out the right information and making sure that the locals understood what was happening and when their systems would be accessible through our statewide database again. So I think there was just a lot of uncertainty. I think a lot of people were, in the situation they'd never been in before. I think we did a lot of things really well, but I think we also did some things that we learned a lot of lessons from. And being, I guess, as Noah puts it, the center of the universe, we had to up our game and make sure that we got our systems back up, we secured them, and then how do we do that and earn the trust back of our locals, our voters, and our, just general public, and do that in a way that's transparent, but also securing our systems as well. So for me, I think it was a lot of uncertainty in 2016. And then in 2017 and 18, as you said, when critical infrastructure was designated, and then the talk of how are we going to support our locals, I think when, in Illinois, and we can talk about this too, there was legislation that was passed by our General Assembly that tasked the State Board of Elections with creating a program that supported our locals. From a State Board of Elections standpoint, there wasn't anybody on staff. I'm not at the time, wasn't a security individual. I was an operations person. I'd worked in a county clerk's office. There wasn't anybody that kind of fit that true mold of an election security expert. It didn't exist. So at the time we thought, how on earth are we going to build this program to support our 108 local election authorities with the cyber support that they need to help defend, detect, and recover from a cyber incident? So once the legislation was passed, I think our agency actually, in a funny turnaround, I think, we went and testified that, we think this is a good program, but are we the right agency to task the creation with? We're elections individuals. So in the end, they tasked us with it, and we had to come up with a plan of how are we going to do that. And ultimately, we knew we couldn't do that alone, right? We had to reach out to individuals within our already established state government and ask for some assistance. And I think that's kind of when you alluded to the meeting in 2018 at MSISAC. How are we going to tackle this? How are we going to build this program to where we have all the experts that we know of within our state, resources that are already available, get them all at the table to talk about how can we help these small to mid-medium jurisdictions get to the standards that maybe some of our larger jurisdictions were already at, and how can we give them all the same equal level of support, give them the resources that they need, and then support them because it's not about, when or if it's ever going to happen, it's going to happen. So kind of taking the taboo away from when you have an incident, making sure that you report it, making sure that you reach out, get the support that you need so that we can get our systems back up, and then just helping each other understand, what works best for our state officials, the way our state is set up. We are one of the, I think, last 5 or 6 bottom-up states. So how do we do that with our current structure, with the implementation, the local levels having the authority to administer the elections, but us at the state level, and even then, reaching out to the federal level, how do we provide those resources to the locals in these situations? And that's where the brainstorm happened when the funding became available. And we started thinking, we're going to reach out, we're going to partner with the Department of Innovation and Technology, which is our already established statewide IT department, and our Fusion Center. Every state has a Fusion Center. It's a post 9/11 initiative. So we partnered with them. How are we going to utilize our Fusion Centers to push data out to our locals? And we partnered with state police. So they have a role in that as well through the Fusion Center. And we also eventually partnered with the National Guard so that we could have their assistance when needed. They don't have a daily role. It's just federal election cycle. If we need them, we utilize some of their cyber support. So it was just thinking, how can we bring all of those individuals to the table? And then it kind of expanded with our HSA, our Homeland Security Advisor, through our Emergency Management Agency is involved. Obviously partner with DHS, FBI, CISA, the ISACs. So there's a lot of moving pieces to our program. And that's why we have our local navigators in place. And we also have an information sharing program that's built into our program. So we kind of have 3 different sectors of it, and we can talk about those more.
Yeah, I love it. We've got a bunch of sort of those nitty gritty questions coming up to hit against you guys. The headline I'll take from here is actually not all ideas from Bourbon Street are bad ideas. Judd, could I turn it to you? Sort of similar question. I mean, it seems, took a similar look at the problem set and thought about a shared service model, trying to connect resources like Amy talked about with locals. So you created Rescue and some derivations. Can you sort of talk about what your driver was?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks again for the invite. It's great to be here. So ours sort of started the same way. There was new HAVA money. We saw a need to help support our counties. And so I approached the secretary along with Trevor Timmons, our head of IT, and we tried to sell the secretary on a Cyber Navigator program very similar to Illinois. In fact, we used the Illinois framework as a selling point. You know, our secretary just wasn't real keen on that design, but liked the idea of creating an election security team. And so we went back to the drawing board and came up with what ended up to be Rescue. And one of the reasons why I think Rescue probably was appropriate for Colorado was because we already had an election security team on the IT side. And so we sort of had some of the built-in infrastructure that we needed to make a program like that successful. We just needed the elections part of it. And so Rescue, which by the way stands for Rapid Response Election Security Cyber Unit, RESCU. By the way, I had to ask what that meant or what the acronym was in preparation for this because I couldn't remember. Anyway, so what we had to do was fill in the election side, which for us, by the time we were able to wheel this out, we were in the 2019 window. So we were a couple of years behind Illinois. And we were thinking of it more of meeting the information vacuum that was happening at that time prior to and then throughout the 2020 cycle, where suddenly the work that we were doing that, you know, historically had been sort of a sleepy backwater of state government had suddenly become much more prominent, and people were very invested in the day-to-day decisions that our office was making and then how counties were implementing that. And so we wanted to get out in front of the way that that was being communicated. So that's when we developed Rescue. We focused on trying to bring in people who were information specialists, people who understood the questions that were being created by mis and disinformation, and understood how our adversaries around the world were using misinformation against us. And we were lucky enough to hire Nate Blumenthal, who had been working at the White House and then at the Department of Homeland Security, was the head of counterintelligence at DHS, and then was working on the election side prior to us bringing him on. And so he had this amazing combination of understanding what the adversaries were doing, but also having an understanding of what the overall elections policy was at DHS. So we brought on Nate. Nate very quickly, like within days, had recruited Aaron Heyman, who also worked in that world and in Washington, D.C., and was very familiar with a lot of these questions and issues. So very quickly, we put together a two-person team, and then over the course of a couple of years, had various other people that worked in the third role. And we were, as opposed to Amy's version, we were much more sort of internally focused. So we were focused at creating good messages, creating a network of people that could get those messages out, proactively doing this and disinformation, counter messaging. And so we were much more on sort of the information side. And then we also did a big survey of people who were voting in Colorado and their view of how elections went, so forth, so that we could better understand where our messages were failing or things that we could highlight. So those were all things that we were doing that were far less county focused, far more focused on messaging. But then there's Rich and his team at the IT level who were really focused on protecting counties. And so let me hand it over to Rich, who can tell us more about that.
Yeah, thanks.
So just a quick rundown of where we were at. So prior to 2016, we were really fortunate that we had a tremendous amount of support from our state CISO. At the time, I was the CISO for the Secretary of State's office, and we already had a security team doing cyber. So we were fortunate from a technology perspective. We already had a relationship with the State Fusion Center, as well as we already ran tabletops and exercises with the National Guard, actually red team, blue team exercises. Along with that practice and stuff, as Judd noted, our main focus needed to be on misinformation, disinformation, and just that information piece, making sure that we had that clear transparency in elections, clear availability to go to one source of truth. We had already been at the point that with that relationship with the National Guard and others, that we had actually helped with other entities in Colorado with their cybersecurity incidents outside of elections. So that's one of our strongest points that we've had in Colorado is we're really working on a whole of state plan, and that is it's about securing all of our government entities at all levels because we're a team. And I feel that way about the other states too. We've got great relationships with the other states, and we're starting to share excellent information amongst those states, and just cybersecurity, security in general. It's continual improvement. It's DevOps. It's continuing to improve your processes over and over. There is no we're done, as we all know.
Yeah, no, so that's great. I love the way you guys sort of frame up how you take on this new role of both taking care of your own shops. Amy talked about 2016 was getting their house in order, and then 2017 was like, oh God, how do we support 108 locals? You guys similarly, like, how do we gotta make sure we got our stuff together, and then how do we support across the state of Colorado? So states that are thinking about how to enhance their support services to election officials by building a program, a similar one. And there are lots, sometimes it's only one person, sometimes it's outfitted, but there's probably 10 or 15 decision points where you've got to make some critical decisions of what you're going to do. And so now I'm going to move into sort of a rapid fire round. I've got 12 questions here where I love like a minute each on you guys sort of telling me like what decision you came to. The first one is sort of scoping a program, and I think of that as subject matter, right? Cyber, physical, personal safety, operations, information. Like these are all under the election security umbrella, but you can't probably do them all at this point, certainly not to the same level. So, Amy, what's the scope of your guys' program?
Yeah, so initially, like you said, it was focused mainly on cyber, kind of doing those risk assessments and making sure that we had a good idea of where all of our locals fit into, with their risk assessments and knowing where we needed to focus those funds on. So that was in the early stages of the program, getting them signed up for the different ISACs and making sure that we had, two-way information sharing going on with them, designating one person at each office to make sure that they're doing their, annual cybersecurity training. So it was very focused on cyber. And then we had this little switch to where when the pandemic hit, because we already had those established lines of communication, we already had our distribution lists maintained of who are we contacting at each local office, who are we contacting in each IT office, all of those things when everybody started working from home. We already had those established lines of communication, not only at a state level, but also at the local level. And so we were the ones that kind of started pushing out all the information that needed to go out, whether it was, vote by mail initiatives, care funding initiatives, all of that. We kind of helped get that information out through already established distribution lists. And then we started shifting things from that to physical security. We do operations stuff. We do a lot of open source information that we push out. We have analysts that do a weekly, we call it our election connection, so that the locals don't have to do that open source searching and figuring out what's going on in other states. We provide that to them so that they're kind of staying up on what's going on nationally, not only in our state, but other states as well. So we have really expanded into all sorts of different areas, and really it's based on kind of what Rich said. It's evolving. It's always changing. The needs are different with each cycle. So we're really focusing on building a program that is easily adaptable to those situations as they come up, being able to provide the support or even just the contact information that's needed for whatever the hot item is in each cycle.
Well, that's great, using that sort of original issue to create these pathways that you can exercise for other subject matters. Or Rich and Judd, like similar story.
Yeah, so we started out with sort of a mis and disinformation campaign, but really, how do you get there? And you have to get there through understanding the environment anyway. And so Aaron Heyman developed a survey that we did to better understand how Colorado voters view our elections. We used a lot of that information to build the ways that we attacked mis and disinformation. But I have to tell you that quickly evolved to how do we combat the things that are out there that we can't preempt. And so we were doing Google ads, trying to get in front of our voters, but we were also looking for bad narratives on the web. We were looking for threats and harassment on the web. And then that sort of pivoted to personal security as we got into 2020 and 2021. And so a lot of the work of Rescue since then has been guiding personal security of those in our office and those in Colorado elections generally. So all of our, we do searches for harassment and threats to all election security or to all of our election county clerks in the state. So that's kind of our new focus. Yeah.
I appreciate how these morphed a bit into sort of all hazards and ready to support election officials as they need it. It strikes me though that like trying to provide all hazards leaves you with a sort of capacity or skill deficit. So I want to talk about depth of support. Amy, it sounded like some of the things you're just passing information on potentially, but you go really deep into cyber security, right? And there's a ton of, I guess, low-hanging fruit out there. Like how deep do you go with your locals? It does depend on where they are, how resourced they are on the cyber side, and then do you just glance at the top of some of the other things, like here's a physical security resource or here's a personal security resource?
So I think I need to answer that in two different ways. So our cyber navigators are really focused on on the cyber part of things. So if we don't touch their systems, we are there literally to help them navigate through making decisions, giving them the information based off of their assessments, saying here's where you are we use the CIS controls for our different assessments. So really that's their main focus. And we go as deep as if they need to attend a county board meeting to explain to, a local county board why this jurisdiction really should consider going to a .gov domain or, anything like that. That is what they're there for. They are a trusted advisor and there to support the locals at whatever they need. But I don't want to portray that we're actually working on their systems because that's not the case. They
Right.
have their own IT support and we advise them in those situations that they need it. The other side of things where you're talking about physical security and resources that are available, that's more in our information sharing program, which we push out through, we have 2 analysts. We have one that sits at the stick full time, which is the Fusion Center. And then we have one that sits at the State Board of Elections here full-time as well. So those individuals kind of take on the pushing the resources out when it comes to those physical security things, those safety, trainings. We coordinate. We've done bomb threat training through CISA. We partner with them and we host that for all election officials. We've push the safe assessments that CISA offers, where they'll come in and not only do a physical security assessment of an election office, but the whole government as well. And so those are some things that we help support, give them the information so that they can reach out, make the best decisions for their jurisdiction on where they want to go in those areas. It's been a real good partnership with the CISA and the safe assessments. There's things that the locals have learned that we don't have anyone on our team that could travel the state and do these things in addition to the risk assessments as well. So there are certain things that we are really in the weeds with, and there are other things that we just provide the resources to the locals. Here's where you go for those things, and then if they need additional information, we are the ones that they go to. And that's really worked for having kind of a one-stop shop for them. They don't have to figure out who they need to call for these things. They know they can call us. And, if we don't have the answer off the top of our head, we're going to do the research for them and get them the information that they need.
I can only imagine for like those partners or service providers, how much nicer it is to deal with like a state level entity to work through to locals, as opposed to trying to get direct one-on-one bilateral comms with, 9,000 local election officials or 108 in Illinois. And through the partnership model, it seems like you're able to get a pretty deep level of support to some of your under-resourced counties. Rich, Judd, similarly, like how deep in some of these areas are you able to go with your locals?
So we, even prior to 2016, we were doing a lot of stuff to work with the locals. And in fact, we helped them with different incidents that weren't even election related on different parts of their network to try and help, because we did have a relationship with the state CISO. And we had kind of formed a volunteer group of cybersecurity experts that could respond to different incidents across the state that we were a part of. So that really helped us. Along with that, we formed a group called the Colorado Threat Information Sharing Group. And the idea behind that was to get threats out early, share it with anyone that was a member. And as of recently, a few weeks ago, we transferred that to our State Fusion Center instead of it being our office, which is where it really belongs. And that's really going to help us a lot. We had that relationship with the State Fusion Center to be able to move forward. And not only that, we had already done training exercises and had help from the National Guard and their cybersecurity staff. One of the things that we did offer was endpoint detection and response for free. So you made a great point, Noah, and there's different sizes. The small counties needed that. The large counties don't. And so we really wanted it to be, and the EDR that we chose at that time had a hierarchy model. Because as Amy pointed out, we can't run their shops. We don't have enough staff to go in and do all their IT work, but we can most certainly supplement and help add support. So we chose a hierarchy model where we could see, but they were administering. And that way we could help them at all those different levels. And that was only on the smaller counties that needed that. The larger counties, we work with them and they helped us. It wasn't like we have a good relationship. Some of those large counties have excellent staff that can help our team. And they actually helped us build that out and choose EDR solutions and other solutions to protect those endpoints. The other piece is from a technical perspective. I can get real technical, so I apologize. Remember, I am a security guy at heart. So, web application firewalls, Cloudflare, different tools that we utilize to protect those systems. I believe we were one of the first states to put two-factor authentication across almost everything. And so we've been fortunate with that to try and really encourage the counties. Now, as far as that communication, here was the big keys that I've really loved is forever Judd and his team have a weekly call with the counties that they join. And then we started a monthly cybersecurity call with the counties. That way their IT staff and cybersecurity staff can join one call. And then we also join that elections call to get that support and work with them to get the word out on the resources that Amy pointed out. That's been our focus. I cannot tell you how much Amy was right on with CIS controls. The Center for Internet Security, hardening systems, and using CIS controls is the key to strong cybersecurity, in my opinion. And it's been something that the state of Colorado has been using for a long time. So with that, some of the stuff that we're moving towards to keep in mind is procurement and funding. Getting it to those smaller groups, smaller counties and stuff like that can get the funding that they need to get all the resources, as you pointed out, so we can provide that at all levels, because obviously the larger counties have more opportunity for that. As Amy pointed out, we really took advantage of the Homeland Security stuff. All their free offerings have been amazing. You know, cyber hygiene, scanning, malicious domain name blocking, and registering .gov domains so that we can go to trusted sources. That .gov source is key to that transparency and that trusted source.
That's super helpful. I want to pivot just a little bit. Wearing my local hat, like, forget Washington. Like, who the heck is Springfield to be saying anything to me in Illinois or Denver? I can only imagine you guys had to wrestle with under what authority do you create this program where you're going to advise, or in some cases regulate us? I want you to talk about how you wrestled with that, how you got locals to participate and collaborate to sort of deconflict some of that. Judd, I'm gonna flip to you first, because I know your time is limited, and then Amy, sort of close up that question set.
Yeah, so tough question, and a real one that all state election offices face. You're right. We, in many respects, don't have formal authority in this area, and so it's about relationship building, and it's about being there, being a support system for your county elections officials, who, let's be honest, I mean, they do the work. We're just a bunch of lawyers and managers, and we're there to help local elections officials actually administer elections. And so we consider this to be part of the tool set to help those local officials. And one thing that Rich didn't mention this, although he should bend his arm back and pat himself, that when our counties encounter IT problems, and the most obvious ones are things like ransomware, we are often, and perhaps exclusively, the first phone call that they make, because they have relationships with us, because they know our names, they know where our office is, they know who's going to answer that call and what they're going to do. And we get into cars and drive 4 hours across the state to be the first responders when something happens at one of those offices. And I think the fact that we've built those relationships over a long period of time allows us to go and say, hey, I know we don't have the formal authority to do this, but we're going to ask you to do this, and we need you to do it. And they will. And they'll do it because we have those relationships and they trust us.
I love that, sort of add value first, right? And then then you're able to sort of extract concessions just based on relationships. Now, Amy, of course, to make your program successful, you had to use those same levers, but you were given an additional sort of, this was actually put into legislation.
That's right. We did have legislative authority. The program was created by law in 2018. So we did have kind of the, that going for us, I guess. But it was a volunteer program. It said we had to create it. It didn't say the locals had to participate. So we had to figure out a way to earn their trust and build a program that was really meant for them. And that's what we did. We talked a lot to them. We used them as an advisory to say, we are building this program for you. So you need to tell us what you think is important at this, as we create this program. How can we from a state level help you at the local level? That was tied to funding. So if you wanted access to grants, we did make you join the program. So I guess that was kind of the carrot stick method that we used. And initially, we did have some pushback, and we did have to have those, tough conversations explaining that, we weren't there to, I think, having gone through that incident from a state level, I think a lot of locals were like, well, you're the problem. We're fine, right? So how can you help us? And taking a step back and realizing that, we had some work to do here at the state board as well, but also getting them to understand that while we're doing the work, we want to help you do the work too. so that we're all on the same team. And ultimately, it was hard, but it also was a very rewarding journey to get them to understand that we are a team. We've proven that, we're not here to take over their systems. We are not Big Brother. We don't have the capacity to do that, nor do we want to. We want to make sure that, I think, you said it earlier, that from a statewide standpoint, we are all in the same area when it comes to best practices and understanding and making sure that our voters understand that we are working to be transparent with these processes and making sure that they trust and understand how our elections are administered locally. And by doing that, having access to all of these different resources and using the same best practices and same framework for assessments really helps in pushing that narrative. We are all doing the same thing. We all are working to this set of standards to make sure that we are running free and fair elections.
Well, that's great. Well, Rich, similarly, like, you got anything you want to append to that? Now that Judd's gone?
It's hard to follow that because Amy hit it right on there. I mean, it's all about relationships and the fact that we're a team. There has been different things. One of the legislation or one of the rules that was actually passed was that if there was a incident that they were notified in the counties, that they did have to tell us about it if it impacted election systems. So I think that from a legal perspective, that was one thing that we did move forward with that was important, so that we ensured that we were getting the information beyond the volunteer point. Now, we always try. You're always better off having people, for the most part, want to be involved, wanting to be part of the process. And so that's totally what we focused on, with our tabletop exercises, with our county calls, with our cybersecurity calls, cybersecurity webinars to train people in the past that we've had. One of the things that it's a team effort, all across the board. One of the things that I know that we had is we sent our protective security advisors, or we asked counties if they wanted to go through a PSA with Homeland Security to go check out the physical security of their sites. And so just establishing those relationships and mainly letting the biggest key, there's so many resources out there. And one thing I want Amy's help with eventually, with the state of Colorado, is getting grants and figuring out grant funding. That is, buying stuff is difficult. So that's really what it comes down to, is beyond just building that trust relationship. That's step one. But now making sure we can get those resources and the funding to those that really need it.
Yeah, so it's so interesting to hear you guys talk about partnerships. You're using CISA and others as sort of force multipliers for yourselves when it comes to like some of that deep subject matter expertise. But of course, Amy, you hired 8 navigators, right? Or that's the plan. And you guys had at least 3 in rescue. And a lot of that is field work. Of course, they're not putting hands on keyboard, right? They're sort of not doing any of the technical stuff. They're helping with awareness and like getting across the finish line and like signing contracts with CISA or whatever. But if you're thinking about new states spinning this up, I'm interested in how you guys considered staffing for this. On the one hand, this is security, so we could lean in on security subject matter expertise. On the other hand, so many under-resourced counties are, let's say, relatively immature, and so the low-hanging fruit could be sort of gobbled up, maybe with just like a relationship type person who can become a best friend real fast. How did you guys strike the balance of staffing these programs? Yeah, I'll start there. Amy?
So our navigators are actually contractors through our Department of Innovation and Technology. So we, again, as the State Board of Elections, we have a lot of people on our staff that are experts in elections, but we have our own internal teams, but we didn't have the resources here to push out individuals that could travel the state. So we kind of took the approach of, if we have these individuals as contractors through the Department of Innovation and Technology, we can hire them in their regions so that they can get to the locals in a 2 to 3 hour drive. So each region through the state, we have 4 zones. Our Clerks Association had already established those a long time ago. So we used that model and we said, okay, they meet every month. These 4 zones meet monthly. We need to embed people in those communities, have them get to know the individuals. And, you know, when we interviewed them, we looked at people that had some technical background, of course. But again, as I said before, there was no, if you advertised for an election cybersecurity person, no one, who do you have in 2016 that's going to really fill that? So we knew we needed great communicators that had some technical expertise, but we also knew that we couldn't send someone in that could not have a conversation from a knowledge base of where our clerks were at that time. So it looks different in different parts of the state, but we chose people that we knew would be good fits for communicating. That was our number one thing. You know, we have an individual that was a former teacher. We have individuals that worked in smaller IT shops. We have people that worked in, you know, maybe support in a different agency. So we have a broad spectrum of individuals that we hired, but one of the big things that we looked for was communication skills. We had to have someone that we knew could go in, earn their trust, be someone that, you know, when we had an incident, they called for support, and then was able to then attend those local meetings. And if there was a local tabletop, you know, that person could get there. With our you know, I'm based in Springfield. We have an office in Chicago, but not being able to get to a county in, you know, a day and a half, that's a problem. So that's why we chose the individuals that we did. We put them in the regions, and it's worked really well for us. So we're happy the way that it worked out. There's a statewide expansion outside of elections that's going on. So, you know, we're to a point in our program where we don't need these individuals full time. We need them when we need them. We need them during our assessment years, and those sorts of things. And elections will be their number one priority. But the Department of Innovation and Technology is going to, you know, push out a statewide program. And so those individuals will start working with other local offices that they've already had those opportunities to meet. Because a lot of times if you're working with the treasurer's office, it's the same person for the county clerk's office. So, you know, overall, it's worked well for us in the manner that we hired and chose our individuals.
That's really, I mean, it's good to know. I do keep hearing like relationships, communications, but the ability to both speak elections and technology, because you are that sort of go-between, that translator. All right, so final sort of question, Rich, you first. Like it's sort of the elevator pitch. You're telling another state, like, can you do this? Should I? You know, and what did Colorado get out of it?
So absolutely, you can do it. I think it's been tremendous. And I think it comes back to those relationships. Just to key off what Amy just said, cybersecurity talent is hard to get, let alone cybersecurity talent that also knows elections. So with that, it's about building a team, having those resources connected. So you know where your elections experts are, you know where your cybersecurity experts are. I like the fact that Amy is working with her Office of Innovation and Technology. We're also working with OIT on a whole of state cybersecurity plan with that. So I think focusing on whole of state and all of government, and then knowing where you can get those different resources. When counties needed help in specific instances, we got help from larger counties. We got help from our team, our cybersecurity team. We got help from OIT. We got help from the Fusion Center, and we kept that communication open. So it's all about using the resources you already have, because we don't have unlimited funding, building on those resources, building trust with those resources, so people aren't fighting over, oh, I'm responsible for this, I'm responsible for this. Who cares? There is enough work to go around. We need to work together and be supporting each other. And that includes our relationships with other states. We've worked with Oklahoma and other states on information sharing. Across the board, I think that it's all about teamwork and getting those resources so people know that they're out there. That is the key. Now, I do think that absolutely, we want to get security teams in our elections offices, at the Secretary of State's offices. It's important to have those experts there. But then the key to that is tying those experts in with the other experts in the community. So we are all working together to make all levels of government, elections and otherwise, secure, because the bottom line is they're all under attack.
I love it. I appreciate that so much. And your guys' approach, a team-based approach. All right, Amy, close us out. Can they? Should they? You know, and what can they expect? Like, how's Illinois benefited?
So I think absolutely you should. I think if there's hesitancy on anybody's part, just as you said, get the right people at the table, whether it's, you know, resources that you've already had or reaching out to individuals that you may not have. If there's a connection to be made, I think you should at least invest in the opportunity that's there. For us, that was one of the biggest things, was getting ourselves in a position where we could pick up the phone and call, you know, the state police, or we could call the FBI, and they know who we are on the other end. And so I think if you're contemplating where should I start, look in-house, see what you already have, see what's already established, and then make that better. If you don't have the authority to make a program like this, or you don't have the funding to do that, I think looking to what you already have at your fingertips that maybe could be utilized in a different way than you've ever used before is a good place to start. But I definitely think reaching out and establishing those information sharing contacts is definitely something that even just to start, that's the first you know, step in the long road that never ends. And then getting feedback. If you know, it's easy to host or create some sort of advisory committee with your locals at a state level and talk to them, ask them what kind of resources they'd like you to provide them. I think you'd be surprised what you hear, especially with the current climate and being overwhelmed, because we're really good now at sharing information and it's coming at them from all different areas, kind of helping them focus in on one thing and kind of setting those milestones. And, you know, creating those relationships would be a great start for anybody.
Well, look, I appreciate you both. You know, I wore that local election official hat. I recognize, like, man, the liabilities that came to me in Cook County, even though I was resourced, you know, could be affected by what happens to one of the smallest. And so that's why we talked about building a program to resource them, maybe instead of us at the same level. States, I think you guys are realizing what happens in your counties blows back on you guys, good, bad, and otherwise. We are really all in this together. So I appreciate you guys' approaches, and thank you for being on here. I'm going to take just a couple minutes to close us out. We've written a case study detailing Illinois' story, which I think is published on our website. We've got one coming in the next day or so from Colorado. We've published one on Virginia, who had a derivation of a similar program where they relied upon college students to come in and build partnerships. Iowa's got a strong program of information sharing and partnership with the National Guard. New Mexico, Minnesota, Florida, like this idea has spread. They're all effectuated a little bit differently. So recognizing that, we've also published an election security implementation guide. You heard Rich and Judd and Amy go through a series of decision points today: scope and scale and staffing and funding, you know, and assessment tools. There's like 15 different points where you've got to sort of figure it out. This reference book highlights what some of the states are doing, but helps drive you through those decision processes. And I would encourage any states that are considering a program, either building it from scratch or adapting existing like staff and personnel to be able to fill some of these gaps, to take a look at that. And that, my friends, is the end of our Accelerating Excellence conversation today, with much gratitude to Colorado and Illinois. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you both for inviting us, and great conversation.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.